welcome to episode 17 of Living Truthfully. My name is Amani Maranga, and I'm so grateful that you're still here listening to this podcast. Now, on this 17th episode, I am super duper grateful because, believe it or not, we are at, wait for it, 40,000 plays. 40,000 plays. What an amazing gift you guys are giving me, that you're listening to me and that you're giving me feedback. And I want to encourage you, please keep writing to me. Let me know what this podcast means to you. On Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, at Amani Maranga is my handle. And then share this podcast with everyone who needs to hear it, because sharing is caring. And now, ladies and gentlemen, episode 17 of Living Truthfully. Are you ready for it? In this episode, after such an amazing heavyweight conversation with Michael Oyer, I reached out to yet another heavyweight, all the way from the United Kingdom. Actually, he's in the United Kingdom. He took my call, and what I was hoping for was great insight and a different perspective. And boy, oh boy, did I get what I was looking for. What? This is a must listen. Ladies and gentlemen, voters too, come closer. Get your cup of tea. Get comfortable. Are you ready? Renowned psychologist and relationship guru, Chris Hart. Wow, and there are stories to be told. And I have to say, these conversations contain mature themes, and listener discretion is advised. Chris Hart, thank you for taking my call.
It's a great pleasure.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. And you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for coming on to the podcast, Living Truthfully.
It's a pleasure.
So, allow me to just go straight into the conversation, Chris. Sure. We've had a conversation, and I've been able to give you a little background on the podcast, Living Truthfully. And I want to ask you a question, Chris. Why do men get married?
Well, of course, not all men do.
Oh, that's true. So the ones that are...
Actually, men fall into three categories.
Okay.
There are those that choose to marry. Mm-hmm. We're really talking about guys who are choosing to marry for the first time.
Yes.
You know, so you're talking about guys who are relatively young, mm-hmm. and some of them choose to marry. And we'll talk about how they do that in a moment.
Okay.
Another group mm-hmm. actually choose not to marry.
Yes.
They choose to live a completely different lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And you see them quietly developing that choice during the same time as their colleagues are getting married. Mm-hmm. And then the third group are the guys who don't get married for some other reason. Now, a few of them don't get married because of their sexual orientation or because of they're asexual or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of that group don't get married because the women won't marry them. There's quite a lot of men who don't meet the criteria that women use to choose a spouse. And so they get left on the shelf.
I think I met one of those guys on my podcast.
So you can see that the decision-making, if I can call it that, is different in all those different cases.
Yes, it is.
You see what I mean?
Yes. Wow.
I mean, shall I just go on and talk a little bit about
please go. I'm just listening. Yeah. I'm already blown. Right. My mind is already blown.
Right. Well, look, we can rule out the sexual orientation and the asexuality thing because the numbers are very small and those people just don't take part in the process. You know, they go a different way. People who are asexual, for example, don't want sex. And if they do get involved with a woman, it's only for the purposes of procreation or something like that. It's a very low-key thing. So we'll put those on one side unless you're interested a bit later. The ones who are left because the girls won't marry them, are basically the unsuccessful men.
Mm-hmm.
Women won't marry men who are unsuccessful. Now, that can be in a number of categories. It could be just income. It could be social skills and status and impact socially and so on.
Mm-hmm.
If you meet the sort of female requirements, a girl will marry you, and if you don't, she won't.
Mm.
And that's heavily skewed by the economy of whichever country you happen to be in. So if you have a country where the difference between rich and poor is trivial, like in Scandinavia,
Mm-hmm.
the number of men in that category who the women won't choose is quite small.
Mm.
Whereas I think you can imagine in other countries where the rich are fantastically rich and the poor are incredibly poor, it might be as many as 40% of the men.
Wow.
You see what I mean? Those men, they'll have girlfriends, they'll have a wild time, maybe, but they won't settle with one woman, and they won't have a family. Does that make sense?
It does. It really makes sense.
The girls will actually go to a lot of trouble to avoid them being the fathers of their children. In fact, the girls will deliberately choose to have their children by successful men, even if they can't find one of their own. You know, they'll choose to be a rich man's mistress rather than a poor man's wife.
Wow.
So you get all sorts of crazy things happen where, you know, you'll have a woman who's got a regular boyfriend who's not successful.
Yes.
And he thinks he's got a family, but actually all his children are from the other guy.
That's crazy, man.
Yes, it is. But, you know, you can understand why, can't you? I mean, a woman wants to have successful children. So she wants genes from successful men. And she wants to be provided for. It's hard work rearing a child. So what's the point of being with somebody who can't provide? It's very cold and very logical. And people don't think about it. They just do it. You know what I mean? A woman doesn't consciously sit down and think, I'm going to be a rich man's mistress because I don't like any of the other men. It just happens. And she thinks it's just happened. But actually, she deliberately chose it subconsciously.
Do you know how many problems you have solved just by talking about this?
Now you can see why polygamy is so common in areas of the world where income disparity is high. You see what I mean? Because to a first approximation, in a place like Nairobi, 60% of the men are fathering all the children.
60% of the men are fathering all the children. So
all of the children.
So they're fathering children that are from the other 40%.
They are being reared by single mothers. They're being reared by women who slipped one past their husband. You get.
Wow.
It's a dog-eat-dog world.
What?
It's a dog-eat-dog world. It's a dog-eat-dog
I don't think you understand the things that you are saying, because these things are...
Go on.
First, I think that is a crazy statistic. But secondly, you actually touch on something that came out of the podcast when we were doing the Single Men series.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that came out was this men who met this wonderful women maybe at the beginning of their careers.
Yeah.
But these women wanted someone more successful than these men were at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, you know, that relationship did not develop. And
that's right. You see, women are quite sophisticated because if you imagine a couple meet when they're in their mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the guy won't be wealthy in his mid-20s unless he's daddy's boy, you know.
Yeah.
And the girl will know that, but she can smell success in a student. You know what I mean? You can tell, can't you, who's going to succeed and who's not. So she might well marry him while he's relatively penniless because she knows he's going to get there.
Yeah.
On the other hand, she won't marry him if she can see the seeds of disaster. And I don't know whether you've come across these young men who they call themselves incels, involuntarily celibate.
I haven't.
In other words, the girls won't have anything to do with them. And it's because they can see that this guy is not going to get anywhere.
Is that a thing? Incel, is that a thing?
Incel, yeah, you can look at it on the internet. There are guys who call themselves incels, and they rant and rave about how hard and cruel life is.
Oh, wow.
But the plain fact is that they need to get their act together. They need to know what it is that women want and to learn those skills. I mean, we all start off as tiny children with no skills at all. Some people, by the time they're 16 or 18 years old, are socially skilled, and some are not. You get it. And it's a learned thing. It's got nothing to do with, your genes or anything like that. You pick these skills up as you grow, if you're wise.
Yeah. What a caveat, if you're wise. So, Chris, are you telling me that this whole marriage equation is economic?
It's got a huge economic component. Yes.
Wow.
I mean, think of it like this. In general, in nature, male mammals do not support their offspring. The buffalo has his wicked way with as many cows as he can, and then buggers off and eats grass. Humans are very different. The male gives a huge contribution towards the upkeep of the child. I mean, in the old days, it would be in terms of how well he hunted or dug his ground. Nowadays, it's in terms of money and status and all the rest of it. But that's part of the equation. It's such a big deal to rear a human child compared to a calf.
Well, I know.
A calf is sexually mature in a year. A child takes 20 years to be independent.
Yeah.
So that this equation, the man must be able to provide, is the whole basis of marriage. It's the reason we do it. We don't like to admit this, but it's all about what the guy brings. Of course, there are two components to that. There is the money, the status, the fact that he's successful. Yeah, and of course, she also wants evidence that he's fit and healthy and he's going to have healthy children and all the rest of it. And you can see how that leads to the things that women find attractive in men. They want them tall, muscular, you get it.
Yeah.
But they also want them to be successful. They want other men to respect them. In fact, that's one of the things they use as a deciding factor. If they look at the men, they watch which guy is being respected by the others, and that's the one they want to go out with. It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm beginning to think I might be an incel. Okay, I'm joking. But
No, you're not. No, you're not. You don't look like one. Okay, back to the men.
Yes.
Back to the men.
Yeah.
So now, we talked about the guys who get ignored. We
Yes.
talk about the small proportion who aren't interested anyway.
Yes.
And now we've got the other two groups, the ones who are interested and the ones who are not interested.
Yes.
Now, the ones who are interested because they begin to realize that they're winners. So typically the guy who has finished his education, he's got into his career, and about 2 or 3 years later, he's beginning to feel pretty good. He's thinking, wow, my income's good, I've got a nice flat, whatever, And into his mind pops the thought that he needs a family. It's time to get married. He doesn't consciously think about it, but he starts looking for a different sort of girlfriend.
One
And
who
the
can
rest-
settle. One who
The rest
can
sort of
settle in.
follows along,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's looking for a girlfriend who would make a good wife rather than a girlfriend who's good for a quick lay. He's looking for a woman who's going to be more faithful. So he starts to value that sort of set of attitudes. You see what I mean?
Makes sense.
And of course, what's his reason? He knows that the women find him attractive. He knows he's got the money. He knows he's got the status. So he knows he's going to get the pick of the women. And he's consciously choosing women who will be faithful, so that in a good world, all his children will be his. Do you see what I mean? Each guy, as he enters marriageable age, depending on his degree of education and so on, he will reach a certain age where he perceives that he's successful. So a guy who, for example, left school from Form 4 and started a business and suddenly, wow, he hit gold, you know, he will be thinking about getting married quite young. But the guy who went and did 2 degrees at university won't start thinking like that until perhaps he's 30 years old.
It's true. You're so right.
It's all about the perception of success.
So you're saying that as guys, we need to get into a place where we feel we are successful enough to be able to get a wife.
So that we begin to realize that we're able to attract the right women, you know, the high status women, not necessarily the most beautiful women, but the faithful, dependable, look after me for the rest of my life sort of women.
That is actually so uncannily true, man.
Yeah. But now you then are left with the other group. There are some guys who, either because they're not quite so successful or because they are fiercely independent or for some other reason, they decide they don't really want to do that. They prefer having lots of girlfriends and messing around and drinking heavily and leading a fast life and being responsible to nobody. And so they are the ones who pursue a completely different reproductive strategy. Their strategy is to get as many women pregnant as possible and run for the hills. They are like that buffalo. You can see how the 2 strategies differ. In one, you put all your eggs in one basket. You choose one woman. You choose to put all your effort into rearing 2 or 3 children. And you support them heavily. The other guy, he tries to have as many kids as possible, and he just throws them out into the world to do the best they can.
And hence why 60% of the men are raising all the children.
Yep. Is that making sense?
Sadly so.
Now, there's another little quirk that comes into play now that didn't used to happen. Everything I've said has been true since Adam was a young man. But in the last 50 odd years, we've started doing something that's never been done before in the whole human history. And that is, we now educate all the women. It's never happened before. I mean, 100 years ago, we didn't educate the men either. You know, there weren't schools 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So now suddenly, though, we went through a period where all the men went to college and all the women were really glad to get hold of a well-educated man. And then all of a sudden, the women started to go to college. And now you've got a substantial minority in the population where all the women have been educated. Now, those women don't want to marry early. So they are in a complicated place where, you know, the guy they went to college with, the guys they went to college with start thinking about getting married in their late 20s. And the girls don't want to because they want to continue their career a little longer. They've twigged that the moment they start having children, their income potential will fall. So they put it off. Not consciously, but they just put it off 1 year at a time. You know, they say, "Oh, I'll get married next year," and they keep saying it. And so suddenly they wake up one day and they realize they're in their mid to late 30s, and they still haven't married or had any children. Now, the problem is that the guys they went to college with have got married, and what they've done is they've married down. They have married women who are not as well educated as themselves, who are still keen to get married. You get the idea?
Yes.
So instead of marrying a fellow doctor, they marry a nurse or whatever. Now what happens is that the woman who is on the shelf, so to speak, in her late 30s, she can't marry her age mates. So she marries a guy who's a bit older, probably in his second marriage. And so you get this thing where a man will marry for the first time in his late 20s, early 30s, divorce in his 40s, and marry a woman who's in her mid 30s. Is this all making sense?
It is. I think you're predicting my life. Though I was fortunate, I married up the first time.
Great, good. Well, it's nice when that happens. And it does happen.
fortunate,
Don't get
yeah.
me wrong. Everything I've said is a bit individual.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
nobody follows the rules
yes,
exactly.
yes. Wow.
But you see these patterns. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I definitely. I see them. I obviously see, and it's incredible because I can give you names of people that you have described
Yeah.
in the conversations that you've had.
And let me give you another little group that are a problem. You see, you remember I mentioned those guys who didn't get married when they were in their late 20s, early
Yes,
30s.
yes.
They were too independent. They
Yes.
wanted to go out drinking all the time. And what. Now, those guys initially act like guys who are going to get married. And it's only by the time they get to about 35 or 36 that you realize that actually they're permanent bachelors. Now, they are deadly because they are still single. They are 35 plus something. And then they meet up with this girl who's the same age as them and who wants to get married. And she thinks she's dead lucky. She's met this wonderful guy whose big social life. He's a wonderful character. He splashes money about and he's single. And 4 years later, they're both still single. He's never going to get married. And he just eggs her on, but he never behaves himself. You get it, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
You see them all the time. And they create enormous heartache. And they're very unfaithful. I mean, they are nice to this woman when she's around. She's their housekeeper, the sleep-in housekeeper. But he's always messing about in the bars.
My goodness.
Life's fun, isn't it?
So, I'm wondering whether I should be asking whether there is a remedy.
I don't think you should see it as a remedy. I'm afraid you should see it as a war. It's a process where everybody is playing their hand. It's like a poker game. And everybody comes in with some assets, their social skills, their physique,
Yes.
their ability to make money.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the men. I mean, the women
yes,
come
yes.
in with youth and beauty and
Yes.
all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then everybody tries to get the best they possibly can, and they choose a strategy that's working best for them. For some, that means choose a really pretty girl and marry her. For others, it's get into bed with as many pretty girls as possible and don't marry them. For another lot, it's, I'm afraid you're on the shelf because the girls won't marry you because you haven't succeeded. The other thing that's worth saying is that the demographics in Nairobi are interesting. There's a lot of young people,
Yes.
aren't there?
Yes.
If you compare a small town in England and a small town in Kenya, the people in England would be a lot older.
That's true. It's becoming very clear now that we are a very young nation.
Yes.
Yes.
So now what that means is that these young people are living a life and they are in the majority, which is very different from a smaller group of older people. So the older people's values are not very relevant to the younger people's lives. So, for example, the guy who moved to Nairobi from Siaya or wherever and had his children there, he can't give his children any advice on how to find spouses because his life, where he grew up, was so wildly different. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. He doesn't have the same experience as these guys, so
He simply doesn't, no. And he probably has got a set of values that he finds it difficult to articulate, but they are, to be blunt, very old-fashioned. They're very patriarchal, they're very agriculturally based. And he's trying to bring up children in a fast-moving urban environment where everybody's educated. You get very different from what he experienced when he married. So it's quite tough for young people. They can't model their expectations on their parents. Or if they do, then they're going to make a mistake. You hear about young men who expect their wives to be like their grandmothers were. Well,
Yes.
the world's changed. You can't expect that to happen.
We were discussing that earlier, in another conversation about how we expect our wives to be like our mothers and our grandmothers, to be the homemakers, to be,
Yeah.
the cooks and the,
Yeah, and it's changed, hasn't it?
it really has.
And it's all driven by the fact that the women essentially have the same career opportunities as the men when they're young.
Yes.
Everything changes in their 30s if they want to have a family. But right at the beginning, the rules are very different. And your father and your grandfather does not understand that.
That's true. You can say that again.
Yeah.
You can say that again. Wow. So, we didn't even get into how did you learn all this stuff?
Well, I mean, a mixture of things. Obviously, I have a degree in psychology.
Okay.
And fairly early on in my psychological life, I began to get interested in the whole relationship thing. And I'm very much into what's called evolutionary psychology, which is biology-driven psychology. Why do we behave the way we do in terms of what's going on in our bodies? And so I have really studied that area heavily. I mean, it's a heavily written about topic. I'm not telling you anything that isn't in all the libraries, but it's what informs my view as to how men and women interact.
This is an amazing conversation, Chris Hart, and you've said so many things I don't even know where to take the rest of this conversation. I'm going to ask you 2 or 3 questions, and then we can wrap this up.
Okay.
So we had a conversation, and I think in 2 of those conversations, the men felt a sense of compulsion to get married from the women that they were with. So
Yes.
Either felt like they were guilt-tripped into getting married, or there was some, I'm avoiding the word manipulation, but
Well, look, hold on a minute. Let's just think about what you're talking about.
Yes.
How shall I put it? The choosing in setting up a marriage is always done by the women.
Always.
The men parade their stuff in order to be chosen by the women. And okay, you can imagine that, if a guy is learning the ropes, he first struts his stuff in front of relatively unfavorable women, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And 1 or 2 of them might have a real go at him, but he moves on, and suddenly he gets to a place where he's about evenly matched. You know what I mean? His prospects and her prospects are about the same. And so he's attracted to her, and she's attracted to him. And she suddenly makes the decision, this is the one, I need to marry him. Now she will do anything in her power to make sure that happens. She's made the choice. He might still want to delay. He might be thinking about trying his luck again. But she's made her mind up. And once that happens, usually after about a year or so's dating, women make the choice. They either let the relationship fade away, or they start putting pressure on the guy to marry. So most men will tell a story about how the woman made it very clear that they were going to get married or else.
Dude, I don't think you understand what you're saying. I've said this again. What you're alleging that we have no say about...
Oh, I didn't say we've got no say. I'm just saying that the real decision is taken by the women.
Yeah.
And a lot of these decisions are a bit hard to spot. I mean, for example, let me paint you a little picture. I want you to imagine that you're going to a party, okay, and you're footloose and fancy-free. You've not got a girlfriend or anything like that. And you've gone to this party because you know there's going to be loads of women there. So off you go, and you wander into the party, and you look around, and you see lots of pretty girls. Now, you can't talk to all of them. And even if you did, they would hate you for it. Women hate men who are indiscriminate. They want to be They want to be important. So
Yes.
they only want you to talk to one or two of them.
Yes.
How do you choose which one? Well, the answer is obvious. You look around at all the pretty girls and you spot the one whose eyes meet yours and who smiles a bit. You get it. Who did the choosing? She did. Because now you go and talk to her and you think you chose her, but actually you didn't.
You're turning my world upside down, Chris Hart. I've lived this illusion about,
You see,
about
I'll
my
tell you a really
choices.
funny thing.
Yes.
You talk to a lot of 18-year-old boys,
Yeah.
and they will tell you that the thing they are most afraid of is going up to a girl and being rejected. So I laugh at them and I say, it's very simple. You'd never go up to a girl unless you know she wants you to come up to her and talk to her. And so he has to get skillful at watching the signals that say that girl has chosen him. So he goes into the party, he scans the crowd for the girls, and you know how whenever your eyes meet across a crowded room, everybody looks back at you, don't they?
Yes.
And when the girl looks back at a guy who's just met her eyes, she'll signal instantly whether or not she's interested. And that's the only girls you'll go and talk to. Now you're never rejected. You see the point? And what you've done, in effect, is admitted that you have to let the girls choose you.
Where were you when I was 18, man?
I know. Yeah, we
And-
should teach this stuff in school, shouldn't we?
I think so too. I think there needs to be some. I have a son who's 9-year-old, and I just started wondering how I'm going to have this conversation with him.
Yeah, well, start now. Start when he asks you questions about, what do men and women do together, treat it like a normal conversation. Don't be even faintly embarrassed. When he says, where do babies come from? Tell him. And when he asks, how the hell does that all start? Tell him. And before you know it, he will start the process of really getting to understand the whole mating game. You get it?
I get it.
And he'll ask you these questions. He'll say, how did you meet? How did you do this? And you'll tell him. And he'll begin to piece it all together. And he'll probably go on to study psychology or something, because you'll get fascinated.
I'm already fascinated, to be honest. This process that I've been going through has really made me want to study psychology. I think there's so much to learn.
You don't necessarily have to go to college.
Yeah.
Start reading the books.
Yes.
Just start reading,
Yeah.
because there's a lot you can do on an informal level.
Yes.
And if you get really hooked, we'll do the degree. But, it is fascinating.
It truly is fascinating. And this conversation has been incredibly fascinating for me. My world is
Good.
shattered, Chris. I have to go and, find my man card again, because my credentials always depended on the fact that I thought I always did the choosing.
Yeah.
And now I know
Well,
better.
it does feel like that, doesn't it?
It does
It's an
feel like
illusion.
that. Yeah, it is an illusion. It does feel, and I can tell. I always feel like, what went on here?
Lots of aspects of our lives are like that. We feel as if we're acting rationally, but actually we're being driven by stuff that we're not completely conscious of. Why did you choose this car and not that one? Why did you pick up this breakfast cereal and not that one? Everybody is manipulating you, and you don't realize it. You get it. And the same is happening in social life. Why am I attracted to this person and not that one? Well, it's probably more about the fact that she welcomed you and chose you, and you thought you chose her. You get it. It's all very similar.
It's oddly comforting, though.
In a way, yeah.
It is.
And don't lose sight of the fact that we're rational beings. We have brains. We
Yes.
can read. We can talk. We can game the system a little bit.
It is. It's oddly comforting. I'm happy to feel chosen, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, take advantage of that, because if you are chosen, then of course you're going to have a good relationship. If you
Yeah.
chase after the woman who doesn't want you,
Yeah.
it ain't going to work too
It's
well.
not, it's not going to work too well. You're right. So let's talk about the online course that you're doing. Couples coaching.online.
Yeah, couples coaching, all one word, .online. Well, the thing is this: if anybody wants to get in touch with me,
Yes.
obviously, if they go to my website, if they go to my Facebook page or anything like that, they'll pick up all my details,
Okay.
phone numbers, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I'm very responsive to WhatsApp. I'm pretty responsive to Facebook. An email that people send me saying, I've been to your website and I want online counselling, I'm going to respond pretty quickly to that.
Okay.
And we end up doing it just as you and I started off. We do video sort of setup, Skype,
Yeah.
WhatsApp.
Yeah.
It works brilliantly.
It does.
Brilliantly.
It does.
And what's so nice is that for a lot of people, I think it's actually better than going to some counsellor's office because they can do it from home, they can do it from the office. You'd be amazed how many do it from their car.
Oh yeah, it's a good way to spend time in
They
traffic.
just load up the data card on their phone,
Yes.
You buy some data from Safaricom, sit in your car park, and you've got a place all to yourself. Bit of privacy.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it really works.
Couplescoaching.online.
And that's the way for people to get in touch with me and read about how it all works.
Thank you so much, Chris Hart, for this phone call. Oh, wow, dude. I'm so grateful for your time.
Good. Well, I've enjoyed it too. And I mean, obviously, if you want to do something like this again, you're very welcome.
I want to do this again. I will definitely do this again. I want to say you're incredibly amazing in terms of the knowledge that you have. You're very well spoken, so thank you for speaking to us.
It's a pleasure.
I'll tell the guys to get onto couplescoaching.online. I'll tell them to get the book Don't Panic.
Yes. Volumes 1, 2, and 3.
All 3 volumes, volumes 1, 2, and 3. And for you who just realized that, she did the choosing, don't panic. It's okay. It's how it's meant to be.
Yes, that's right.
All right, thank you, Chris. Have yourself a wonderful afternoon, and God bless you. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Take care.
All right, bye. Have I been schooled or have I been schooled? My goodness. Every myth I had shattered. I have learned things. Some I'm not so sure about, but most that I agree with. Chris Hart, thank you so much for doing this and for being part of this episode. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to spend the next episode just getting your feedback and sharing some of your feedback. I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Please write to me on @AmaniMaranga on any of my socials, Facebook, Twitter, or IG, or amanimaranga@gmail.com, or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. And I'm going to share all this feedback next week because you know what? I want you to hear the impact that these stories are having on our lives. Between now and then, be kind to yourself. Between now and then, be truthful to yourself. Be truthful to your circle. Between now and then, remember that your only duty is to be true and not to be popular. And between now and then, please live truthfully.